Hey. All right. Hey, Anthony. Hello, my friend.
Hey, what's up, man?
Let me pause the recording. So I have recorded the last, I think this is the 5th one we're doing of these, and I put them on YouTube and posted those links in the Brewing Dialogues group. So some of you are in that. I don't know if everybody is. If you're not, it's under my page. You can find it there, or just search Brewing Dialogues. I can't imagine a lot else will come out on Facebook if you punch that in. But those discussions, and I put those in there along with a bunch of other YouTube links. I'm going to try to upload a handful of documents in there, but they were over some of the things we've talked about the last few weeks. So last week we talked a lot about Abraham, kind of like trying to pinpoint where we start in kind of the genesis of, if you will, of the Israelite story, which is Abraham. Yeah. So we talked a lot about him and kind of historicity and people in that time and what it would be like to live in that time or be somebody in that era, and how that's really different than, like, say 1,000 years later, but you've got Israel and it's still ancient people, but they're very different, so like the nuances there do make a difference for how we read things. And then so we talked about the flood and reading that, and looked a little bit at the Epic of Gilgamesh and kind of just flood narratives around the globe. So I posted a handful of links that we definitely didn't have time to look at because some of them are long. One of them is by he's like the quirkiest professor I've ever come across. And I think he teaches at Harvard or Oxford. It's one of them. His name's Irving Finkel. And he sounds exactly like you'd imagine, with a big, long, white beard and just the most curious, pretentious, humorous voice in the world. And he gets funding and builds, I can't remember the name of the craft, but it's like an ark, but it's from the dimensions from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he floats it down one of I think it was the Ganges River in India. And people come out there all, "Ooh, ark, Noah, ark," like people that don't even speak English. And he's like, "Damn it," because he's an atheist. He's all, "This is Noah's ark." But then he kind of like, curiously postures about like God's humor in that, and whatever that means. So it's long, but if you're kind of into that stuff, it's worth it. It's just, I was fascinated. I really enjoyed. I watched a few of his things. Some of the other ones are shorter. A couple of Bible Project links in there. So yeah, if I had referenced a lot of those things and just didn't get around to sharing anything, so I tried to collect them all in there. So if you're not in that group, just put a join request in there, and you'll see, and they like allow you to do units in groups. So it's a unit. It just says SCRIPTURA, and all this stuff's in there. So we can and probably will at some point go back and talk more about creation, flood, Babel, and maybe a little bit of that even tonight. But we really kind of ended on, okay, well, early humans, proto-humans, right? Like whether that's primitive man evolving from the jungle, or like the sons of Noah, or the sons of Adam and Eve, right? Like whatever that is, those are early humans, okay, right? So who are those people? Because they're definitely not Abraham. Like, you're talking about a long time between when Abraham, the kind of historic person that the Bible begins around, is, and whenever the earliest humans would be, however somebody would be imagining them in Abraham's day, or in Moses' day, or in Isaiah's day, right? Like, which just kind of like with us and people 400 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, think about history really differently. Ancient people did too, right? Like, people grow, knowledge bases grow, even cross-linguistically, cross-culturally. And so one of the things I didn't post, but I might do it off my phone right now while I think about it, is that list of human fossil sites from around the world with like different types of humans, or like size skulls and whatever. And so one of the YouTube videos I posted in there was 10 extinct like species or races of humans. And so like Neanderthals are one of them, but of course they're not totally extinct because we all got a little bit in us. Most of us do. So that means we've lived at the same time as them. So
Amy has a lot of Neanderthal. I mean, compared to other people.
like more than 3%?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm like 1.5.
But like more than like 89% of people on 23andMe.
Oh, that is a lot.
I have like less than 98%.
Shin bones.
It's because my heritage is all in the UK and Britain and stuff.
Yeah.
All that northern European tribes.
Yeah, mine's all like Nordic European. That's where they all live. They were like
exactly.
ice cave people, you know?
Closer you get to the Fertile Crescent.
Hey, Jamers.
Hey, Jamie.
Are the children asleep,
Hey,
or are they going to assault you at any moment?
Hey guys. No, Haley Joe kept hanging out, and they decided that they didn't want to watch the one movie they were allowed to watch today, so they're all playing hide and seek in the dark outside. So I have the house to myself.
Sweet. Awesome.
So I'm going to listen
Awesome.
to you guys chat and study for my final.
Sounds good. We welcome you. Okay. So anyways, I'll post that thing about human fossils. Are you with Total? No. Sorry, I'm an energy buzz. So the kind of just early humans living with definitely at least different animals that were around that aren't around anymore, right? It's not like we're the only generation that's seen animals go extinct. Like, that's happened while humans have been alive, just archaeological record wise. So where does that leave us, and kind of what does that mean, and why would that even be important? So I thought, right in the midst of this, between before, after the flood, there's Nephilim, right? So there's these creatures that most of the time we're just like, I don't know what to do with those. They're in there with these early humans without even having to take a stance on what early humans are, right? Like, whatever we're imagining in our own heads. What does that mean? Who are those people? Why are there Nephilim? And then there's these other group of people later on, the Raphaim?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Raphaim.
That are like, what, the dead ones? The dead?
Okay.
Something.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that early?
Well, no. So anyways, I was just trying to say there's a lot going on there that we usually just kind of glaze over, because it's like, well, I don't know how to tell the hell the difference between that and all the other weird ass names in the genealogy. So you're just kind of like, I'm plowing through in the name of Christ, and you just read on, but you don't really know, we don't know what you're reading, because that just seems really hard to even try to begin to figure out what that might mean, or what the difference between all those different groups of people would be. But there are definitely some big different categories in there. So I thought Anthony, he introduced me by hosting him for like a conference. Michael Heiser, who's a theologian, just a really very good scholar that's very creative outside of the box in his thinking, and approaches the supernatural, the supernatural world, demons, angels, things like Nephilim, in some unique ways that I found actually like really good and helpful in understanding scripture. But I've only made it about halfway through one of his books, and Anthony knows some of his stuff a little bit better. So I thought he'd be excellent to bring into the conversation tonight, to just maybe give us an intro into, I don't know, wherever you think we should start kind of on that subject. Early humans.
Early humans. All right,
Yeah.
well, let's jump into it. I think before we do that, though, I want to preface. So I'm not sure where my research and Dr. Heiser's material is gonna stop, and where research that other scholars have picked up is gonna move from there. So I won't credit too much, but certainly Michael Heiser was the sort of the gateway drug into understanding a lot of the ancient Semitic world, and sort of what he likes to call the ancient Near Eastern worldview, and just understanding the way that people thought in that place and time. And I think the strength of really a lot of scholars, but really a soapbox of Dr. Heiser's is that we are not the people that the Bible was written to, and culture has changed our thinking in such dramatic ways that until we understand the mind of the ancient person, then we can't even understand the story of the scriptures. And until we understand the story of the scriptures, we can't even have a conversation about what to do with it, right? So even once you know the story, you still have to make a lot of decisions. And this is fortuitous, and I guess if you'd have given me more than a couple of hours, I'd have maybe jotted down some notes. I got a text.
It's off the cuff. All of it is.
It is.
Yeah,
I got a text about 3.5 hours ago saying, "Hey, you want to get on and talk about Nephilim?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, but we're gonna go watch a movie first." So here we are. No, it is something I've studied in depth, and I do want to talk about, but I want to frame it in a providential, fortuitous circumstance. Jamie and the kids and I went and watched Big Fish. Have you guys seen the movie Big Fish?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so really the whole premise of the movie is that it's about story, and it's about how stories can be utilized to make memories. And what makes I can't even remember his name now, but like the dad in the movie so memorable is that he becomes
last name Bloom.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. See, it's not even names aren't memorable, but his Edward Bloom. Thank you, Laura. So he's so memorable because of the elaborate stories he tells, and everybody knows that his stories are a reflection of reality, at least in some ways, and also in other ways, they're also quite false and invented. And don't get ahead of me and judging what I believe about the scriptures in one way or the other yet. But I think it's a really interesting picture of the scriptures, because as the movie goes on, the main character, who's the son, while his dad is dying, he's uncovering the real story of his father that he never really knew, because he was just this elaborate storyteller. And in the end, he finds that his life was far more meaningful than he ever realized. And story has a way of doing that. Story has a way of bringing meaning into our lives in a way that plain words, raw data, charts and graphs, just doesn't have a way to do it. And it's not to say that the scriptures don't have literary genre to them, that there aren't, so to speak, charts and graphs in the Book of Numbers, and there aren't, the Book of Deuteronomy is certainly some sort of ancient treaty, that format that's being used. And so all of that's true. Paul's letters were letters that took on a particular form. And so there's some reality to that, but we have to understand that the Bible itself, the scriptures themselves, came out of a world that didn't categorize things as cleanly as we do. And the people didn't necessarily think as plainly about matters as we did, because they were scientifically, because they were creating something in order to convey meaning. Okay, and so here's an example of that. If you look at the book of Leviticus, it's primarily law, but the book of Leviticus is not what we would call a legal code. It's not a comprehensive legal code. The book of Leviticus is a spattering of laws that pertains to our particular circumstance. Properly read, the book of Leviticus is a story, and it's a moment in time where story has to take place in a format that maybe is boring for many of us, where the author is citing legal, essentially, whether they were written or not, he is citing a legal code that was understood or in existence in some form, but it itself is not a legal code. It itself is a piece of the story that was provided in a particular place and time in order to address particular needs that society had at that particular time. And so I say all that to say this: as we read the Old Testament specifically, we're looking for, I would say first and foremost, primarily, not a plain teaching. And I know that rubs against what a lot of us have been taught. And certainly I attended two very, 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 very conservative seminaries that said, no, you're looking for the plain meaning of the text. The plain meaning is the meaning. There's no other meaning. And yet that is not at all how the ancient reader read or how the ancient author wrote. And so we've kind of got to get over that hurdle and understand that in many ways what's written in the scriptures is story, and it needs to be understood first as story. Now, if we have time, we'll talk about what to do with it once you understand the story. So Dr. Heiser and I have talked about this, and I've asked him questions, and I like to push against the grain a bit. And okay, I understand the story now. You've helped me understand the story. Is the story true because it's in the Bible? And he says yes. And I like to push and say, but isn't the meaning behind the story, and isn't the meaning what has to be true and not the story itself? And we go around and about just for fun. But so we can have that conversation later if we can. But I wanted to kind of give that to you because we're going to talk about some fantastic.
So let me just ask a question on that. In terms of him, would he say that Jonah's literal?
Jonah?
The book of Jonah, like it literally happened? Or is
I've not asked him. I've not asked him. I know he does entertain Job as not being literal because it doesn't fit cleanly. So he's an ancient Semitic scholar, which means, he's as fluent as you can be in 9 ancient Semitic languages. So
really?
Yeah. So well, and I guess he says that's not as impressive as it sounds because they're strikingly similar, but I don't know. I was going to fail Hebrew if I stuck with it. So I'm not one to, I'll just be impressed.
Hebrew was rough, man. Hebrew was rough. Dude.
So I could have passed it. I just was like, I'll never know Hebrew like scholars know Hebrew. So why, anyway, that's a different story. So when you're talking about, he definitely is open to, because the language of Job does not fit in the time that it claims to have taken place. Now that doesn't mean it wasn't oral tradition that was written down later or anything like that. But he certainly would entertain Job as not being literal. But I don't know about Jonah. Not being historical. Sorry. Yeah, but I don't know about Jonah specifically.
Can I butt in? I mean, wasn't Job quoted on later on saying that even if Job, Daniel, and so were to pray, I would not hear them and save the nation? Wasn't Job one of the ones listed as a real person?
Yeah. So what's interesting about that? So what's interesting about that, Josh, is that I believe that in the late Second Temple period, which is most of the Jewish writings that we have. So anywhere. Late Second Temple would be around 200 to 300 BC up until Jesus. And in that period is when most of the Jewish writings were produced, and then for several hundred years after as well. And in those days, they certainly believed that the characters were literal.
So may I interject? So I think where this is heading is that they thought it was true. They thought it was that these people were true, and literal, even in the Old Testament times, but that they actually aren't, because because another person, a scholar, is saying that even further back they wouldn't have thought that according to the literary genre.
No. So actually, my whole point was that the literary genre should not be taken as strictly as most contemporary scholars take it. That by and large, the literary genre, the lines between literary genre are far more blurred than most contemporary scholars like to talk about them, because of the way that the ancient persons saw literature in general. But let's not get too deep into the whether or not something is true or not, whether it's historical, because the reason I brought that up is because, again, we're going to talk about some fantastic things tonight, and I just don't want anybody to check out on the grounds that that just can't be true, right? I don't want to, we're people who already believe in resurrection, so let's not check out on
Anthony. It's great that everything you said is awesome. All of last week, talking about Abraham as a historic figure in the ancient Near East was like, and we from a lot of different angles. And Josh was on there, and I think Lynn and John, and so we took from a lot of different angles kind of how that might look. The whole point trying to be, let's stop thinking in terms of, the way I phrased it was feeling like we need to defend an interpretation of a text that we didn't arrive at our own conclusion by, from reading the Bible with information informing what we should understand about what the Bible is saying and how it was written, right? So it's like, we usually do it opposite, where we're like, okay, so my pastors or the seminary scholars or the leaders or the radio preachers, whoever it is that we follow and initially follow, we adhere to them because we believe them, right? There's been fruit in our lives, whether they're good people or bad people, doesn't matter. Doesn't even matter if they've got good theology or bad theology. Sometimes we outgrow that. Sometimes we are in pretty decent theology state, like wherever we landed, and that's not bad. But at some point, we're gonna, whatever it is, if we have somebody's theology in a sense of like, we have to defend this against other ideas about the Bible, instead of just seeing like, well, what's true about this? Is that true, what you're thinking there? Could that be a possibility? Could that equal a possibility with what this other person said? Okay, like that's what they're like. We should be able to hold any kind of broad interpretation. And by that, I mean like, an ism, right? Like a really specific thing. Kind of that loosely when we're doing like a critical dialogue like this, where we can talk about like, kind of scholarly level research and have space to ask kind of deep questions and probing questions and like bunny trail questions even. So I felt like all of last week was an exercise in us trying to do that, like for everybody. So I'm going to read this and then I'm going to hand it right back to you.
Okay.
I was just jotting some stuff down right before we started, kind of as a brain exercise of thinking like an ancient person. And I'm like, okay, so it's easy for us to imagine not having like modern technologies, right? Like, okay, that wasn't that long ago. People lived without vacuum cleaners and electricity or even indoor plumbing. It's a little hard to imagine, but it's not that long ago. So we know the people in the Bible didn't have that. But what would it be like to not have a whole bunch of other things that modern people have and some ancient kind of ish people had, but a lot of people where the Bible would be seated wouldn't have. So like I wrote all these down just kind of as a brain exercise to work my imagination on this. So imagine what it would be like to not have a map. To like not ever have seen a map, right? Is the wind too loud? Is it making noise? Can you
A
hear
little
me?
annoying, but it's okay. We can hear you.
I'm gonna scoot down to this. Might be a little bit better. Imagine what it would be like to have never seen a map, right? Like imagine camping, right? You're camping, you're like, well, where was that? I don't know, it was over there. Well, which way is that? It's that way. I don't know. Like, how far is that? You don't know how far things are. You've got no sense of geography. You've never seen a map. The Rosetta Stone. You don't have some like big trilingual, bilingual, information piece that will help you translate from culture to culture. Things got translated really slowly. Paper. Right, paper was pretty hard to come by. And at some point, humans didn't even have paper. Like we had to invent it. Toilet paper, right? Like that was
Talk about a shortage.
Toilet paper. Thank God for that. I'll put up with pollution for toilet paper, man. I think the rest of the human race proved that too, right? But what would it be like to live before you had shoes? Before shoes were invented? Certainly, if there was an Adam and an Eve, and God sewed their fig leaves together. They didn't like hack up an animal and make shoes out of their hides, right? I mean, the Bible included at least. Primitive people didn't have shoes, and ancient people had sandals. Like nobody had sneakers. They didn't even have sneakers in the 50s. What would it be like to live before you had government or police forces or letters or postal services or multiple sets of clothing? Or jobs and careers? Like try to think about life like nobody's defined by a job because everybody does the same damn thing. And if they are defined by a job, everybody knows them by that. It's like, oh, that's like Isaiah the prophet. He's nuts. Like he's the crazy guy. Oh, that's a Jeremiah. He's a lunatic. He's playing with, fecal matter outside of the city gate. Or is that Ezekiel? Like people are known by that, or like in, I don't know, Harry Potter. Like people have those little titles, but that's it. Nobody's known by like a career path or like what you do for a living, really. What would it be like to not have fences? Like there's no such thing as fencing. I mean, cities build walls, but like they're not really fencing. What about no mirrors? That wasn't that long ago. What about you don't even have oil and canvas paintings. There's no painting. At some point, there was no art. People didn't have art, and then somebody, written art, like plaster. And then some people did it. We think they lived up in France, like a super buttload long time ago. I think it was like 40,000 BCE is what they think is the Chavot cave paintings in France. They're like some of the oldest art we found. Before there were roads or countries or nation states. Like, I don't know, like you could just go on and on and on with that list. And you realize, oh, that's a lot of things that I'm all very used to. And that's not really including modern things like air conditioning and the internet and cars and, man, mattresses. Oh, people didn't used to have mattresses. Ooh, that's a bummer. Right? So I just like, we were like in that discussion deep last week. So some of us, maybe half the group here. So this is like spot on. It's great to hear this from like your perspective, because it's helpful to fill out how we try to imagine the ancient world, right? Like it's really like an exercise in, well, a little bit of scholarship, but a lot of like creative thinking, really, and like patient thinking. So yeah, like I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Great. Well, and so, yeah, I appreciate that, Noah, the trying to highlight that the ancient mind was looking at the world differently than we are. And that's the reality of it. And my, I'll assure you that everything I'm going to talk about today, I firmly believe the New Testament authors believed all these things to be actually historical. And so, any of the questions that you guys have about the historicity, to believe that these things are all historical is absolutely on par. And if we have time, we'll have a conversation about, where some of the guardrails might be, or whether there even are any in
Really
interpreting.
muddy. It's really muddy as far as like we can say like as poetic narrative and what might be historicity. It's like the scholarship out there.
Jamie, can you go a little closer to the mic? We can't hear you.
Sorry. I was saying it's not really so cut and dry as to what we can say. This is definitely poetic narrative, and this is historicity, because it's just a little bit more muddy than that. Like Anthony said, it's almost like, we can't just like cut and dry the genre. The scholarship is on both sides of it. And, if you I guess the things to ponder is like, well, what makes something historical? What makes something poetic? Moses has some poems that discuss real events, right? And I just think that like there's more of a depth in how history was recorded, than how we look at it now.
So one of the things that we worked through last week was the idea of history. And that was actually I didn't even read all the things that I had jotted down. One of the things I had written down was like, can you imagine living before there was history?
Yeah, certainly. And that's what we're actually talking about, because we know that at the time that Genesis was written, and that's kind of where we're going to be at today. We are talking about, properly speaking, prehistoric man. How do we know that? Well, because Moses himself doesn't show up until later in the narrative. And I do believe that we're right to credit at least the bulk of the book of Genesis to Moses. I think we're right to do that. But yeah, obviously, if we credit it to Moses, then everything else is prehistoric. And we don't know precisely whether that came by vision, some other form of divine revelation, or by oral history, or by both, or by his own wisdom, deduction, so on and so forth. I don't know. We really don't know exactly how it came together, because Moses doesn't tell us. So
one of the things I was thinking right before we started was, okay, we know that whatever you want to ascribe to Moses, stuff was written down by that point, right? Like, he wrote stuff down. There's a good reason to believe he wrote stuff. He was educated in a freaking palace. I mean, he grew his royalty, knew how to write. His brother knew how to write. Like,
well, it's pretty widely accepted that there wasn't much Hebrew writing before the book of Genesis. So yeah, you're right that writing was a thing, like recording events and religious rituals and things like that, where it definitely existed in Egypt prior to.
But like in the years of slavery, right? And we kind of circled around this last week. What do you think personally was the narrative or the bulk of what's translated to people through oral tradition or prophecy, or however you want to do revelation, before anything's written down after Exodus?
Well,
like, I'm just curious, because I don't think there's like a right answer for that. There's like I haven't really heard anybody ever talk about that.
Well, I'd say we're getting derailed a little bit, but I would say in Hebrews 1, long ago at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. And so I think there's some specificity to it, that certainly when it came to any sort of revelation that was happening in the ancient world, it came through some means of prophecy, whether that was some sort of spontaneous prophetic utterance, whether that was a vision or a dream or or whatever it was, you know, or maybe just unction, another form of prophecy. So yeah, so I don't know that we can clarify that any further than that, but I definitely hold to, regardless of whether there was any sort of oral tradition, I definitely hold to, you know, Timothy 3:16, and obviously
Yeah,
all scriptures God breathed. It's all prophetic in nature. So yeah, so with that said, let's talk about the ancient man though. So ancient man, you know the story, you know, the evil was multiplying upon the earth, and there was a man, Noah, and he had his sons and their wives and his wife. So there was definitely a sense of, there was a familial nature to humanity, to ancient man. We can see that just from the language. Now, I don't believe that Moses was imputing his what would have been a modern understanding of family for Moses. I don't think he's imputing that backwards onto the narrative, because he seems to teach about family in Genesis, in Genesis 1 and 2. And so for that reason, I think that, or actually all the way up to this point in chapter 6. So I think there's a family sense. There's an idea of marriage and parents and children and so on and so forth. And so with that thought, we've got an ancient people who to this point have really only deduced anything from anything true, either from interaction with the divine, or by observation of the world around them. And those are really the only things that they have at their disposal at this point. So in Genesis 6, which is the text that I want to go to, and just see where this explodes into the rest of Scripture, because I do believe this narrative, really what's just a few verses, really explodes forward all the way into, all the way through the New Testament and into the book of Revelation. What we see in Genesis 6, verse 1, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. So we go there's your tie back to the creation account, multiply and fill the earth, right? So when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. They were the Gibborim, the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Okay, so let's talk about this, these verses right here, and then we actually need to go on from there also. But what I want to talk about are these characters that show up, the sons of God. And the sons of God is a very, very interesting term in the scriptures. And I think as we understand the sons of God, we understand from the Old Testament, we begin to understand much more how much more significant and profound it is that we are called children of God in the New Testament. But I won't get ahead of myself on that. So the sons of God here in the scriptures, just as we survey the Old Testament, what we have is a number of passages that have the sons of God as some sort of divine being. Oh, am I on it? Oh, so what we have is a number of passages where the sons of God are talked about as spiritual beings. They were, and the reason for that is that the sons of God were the spiritual beings. They were God's first creation. I don't know if you guys hit this verse last week, but if we look at Job 38:4-7, they're reflecting on the creation account. It says this: where were you at my laying of the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you possess understanding. Who determined its measurements? Yes, you do know. Or who stretched out the measuring line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars were singing together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And what we get is this picture that before even whatever shell, and I'm kind of interpreting here what it means to lay the foundations of the earth and to sink its bases, but whatever kind of shell God created first that he then caused to sprout forth life, before that even was there are the morning stars, also called the sons of God, that were singing and shouting with joy as they observed what God was doing in creation. And that's fairly clear there in Job 38. And so what we have here is a very clear example of sons of God that are not humans, because humans haven't been created at this point. They are God's first children, his divine ones, his we could call angels, which we'll have to talk about that term at some point as we go through this. The other clear place that we see the term son of God is in relation not to a person or to people necessarily, but as we see the nation of Israel itself being called God's son. And the nation of Israel, is a profound nation among the nations, because the nation of Israel was the called out one. To speak of it in terms that actually are probably going to sound weird to us, but also probably ring very true to the ancient people. Israel was in a sense divinized. Israel was lifted up out of the nations. They were placed as a nation over nations, and sort of in God's playbook, and they definitely saw themselves as that way. You get a sense of this in how in the New Testament times, how and in the Second Temple period and some of the prophets, how the Jews saw themselves in relation to pagan people. They definitely saw their nation as being higher than the others, and I think rightly. They were called out to be the people of God, a nation after God's own heart. And so Israel was God's son. What's interesting is that in the Old Testament, we don't really have accounts of individual people. Now, there are places you can certainly argue that, and this being one of them here in Genesis 6, you could argue that sons of God here means humans. So certainly we could argue that, and people have. They've argued that, well, these were the children, whatever. I'm not going to get into the arguments that these are human, because I actually.
Were you talking about the sons of Cain and the sons of Seth?
Yes. Well, yeah, the Sethite view and the Cain, and the sons of Cain view. So, yeah, certainly there were children of Cain and children of Seth that you could argue are the sons of God, who came in and had children with the daughters of men. But so are these. So we're already dealing with a tribal separation here, and certainly maybe. And so what we want to do is we want to go to the scriptures and to the sources. And when I say sources, I'm talking about other ancient literature that would certainly be more authoritative than whatever we think, right? So not as authoritative as the scriptures, but probably more authoritative than whatever we think. And so that's what I mean by other sources. So as we look at these texts, though, I don't think we need to go outside the Bible to see that the sons of God here in this passage are actually the divine beings. Are you going to bed? Sorry, 1 second. I love you. So where was my line of thinking? The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. Think about that strictly from the perspective of grammar, and even not even grammar, maybe just story. When we see details in a story, we want to ask questions about it. And so immediately what comes to my mind here is when I read the sons of God, I go, okay, sons, daughters of man. That is a word, human. That's a human word that's being used there. The daughters of humans is being and incidentally, this is Adam from the Genesis 1 through 3 narratives. This is the Adam. The sons of God were before Adam, and here in Genesis 6, the sons of God come a second time to interact with Adam. And so just from a linguistic standpoint, there's a tie from Genesis 6 back to Genesis 1. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit, which is euphemistic, really. That's been very softened in the English. They've taken from what they know. They've taken to know the women as their own, those that they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit.
You could translate it rape too.
Well,
literally.
yeah.
Like you could read it that way.
Well, and certain, if I were Peterson and I were writing the Message Bible, I would have written, and then angels raped women, right? That's just looking, just linguistically, not even leaving this passage. I think that's, that's really what we see happening here. My spirit shall not abide in humans forever, for he is flesh. His day will be 120 years. That's a whole different thing to get into, and I want to make sure I get where Noah asked me to get. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and they bore children to them. I want to make a comment on this word Nephilim. We know enough about it to know that it's a category of people, and we know that at one point in history people knew what this meant. Now, we don't know what it means. We just know, I'm just going to be as honest as I can about this. Lots of people have speculated about what the word Nephilim could mean, and we just don't know, at least not definitively, what the word Nephilim means. But certainly the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. And there's an interesting Hebrew word there, gibborim, that is the men of renown. Really, really significant word that we'll see if we have time to talk about later. Verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of heaven, for I'm sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So this is a very interesting narrative, and we can't take it. I don't think we're right to take it apart. Moses wrote what he wrote, and he wrote it for a reason. And he wrote it in a context, and I don't think we're right to take it apart. And so, if we take a cold read, it looks like angels raped women. Something was going on in that situation that caused humanity as a race to become so evil that God was going to wipe them out. And yet there was one man who somehow retained favor in Yahweh, the one true God's eyes. And so we need some help understanding what these pieces of story have to do with each other. And this leads me to believe that in the ancient reader, they grew up telling stories about things that helped them to understand what this was about, and we don't have that context for it, but they understood some things about this. And so I want to go to a couple. Well, I'll tell you the one place, and this, it's kind of like the place that a lot of people don't like to go to, but the one place that really gives us the fullest story is actually the book of First Enoch. And First Enoch was written around 300 BC, and it has a Jewish author, and it essentially is an elaboration on the situation of Genesis 6 1 through 5. And First Enoch is not the Bible; it is not Scripture, but it tells us what, even before Jesus, it tells us what people were thinking. And it's not an anomaly, by the way. We have multiple other complete works that reflect on this narrative. From the Hebrew perspective alone, we have the Book of Jubilees, we have the Book of Giants, we have the Book of First Enoch, and then we have a number of texts essentially from the Qumran communities, which we have come to know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. But from those Qumran communities, the people group that were called the Essenes had a number of other documents that were reflecting on this narrative. And so we tend to believe that this was a widespread narrative, and it was common to think big fish, elaborate on the story in order to convey principles.
Or polemic.
Yes, certainly, and Jamie said it could be polemic as well, and certainly, and that brings me into my next point about these is, as we then go to other cultures, Canaanite culture, Ugarit, and the Philistine cultures, and we start to look at the Samaria, and we start to read their literature, we find that there are striking, now the names tend to be changed, but we find striking similarities between the narratives. The major difference being that in ancient Greek history, Hercules is a hero, and in in ancient Greek mythology, Hercules is a hero. But in ancient Hebrew mythology, when a human woman has a child by a divine father, it becomes an abomination in the eyes of the Lord. And so that's what we see flipped. We see the story being the same, but they're heroes in the pagan cultures, and they're an abomination in the Hebrew culture. And I think that's really interesting because it does give us some insight into the passage as we look at it, because it says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. What were these people doing with these sons of God that caused wickedness to be so proliferated on the earth? Well, just go ahead and dig into, because I think as Westerners, we've been exposed a great deal to Greek mythology. So go ahead and just dig into the things that you know from Greek mythology about temple worship practices. And you start to see, oh, wait a minute. If I flip the narrative and I say, well, this is good and not evil, that the sons of God had children with the daughters of men, this is a good thing, not an evil thing, then now we are multiplying wickedness on the earth. So you go to the book of First Enoch, and you find that in Enoch, that the sons of God did indeed come down, and they did have relations with the daughters of men. In the book of Enoch, they, by the way, call them the Watchers. For those of you who have studied in depth the book of Daniel, you get to see a picture into the Watcher narrative that happens there in Daniel. And here the Watchers show up in the book of Enoch, and it's sort of a legion of angels called the Watchers that 200 of them come down in the narrative, have children with the daughters of men. They actually, in the story, they try to repent, and God locks them out of heaven. Yeah, this is an Enoch. This, think the tale, that.
They ask Enoch to go before the Lord for them.
Yeah, so they ask Enoch to go before them. Now that these 200, they had a deceiver who incited them to come down. Now he didn't actually intermix with the women, but he incited them, and his name was Azazel. No, not Azazel. Sorry, that's the literary equivalent in the Hebrew. I can't remember it. Anyway, he's the same as the Azazel character in the book of Leviticus. And the Azazel character incites this rebellion in heaven and brings these 200 down. And with his tail, he swept a third of the stars out of the sky. Okay, so there's all of these literary references that you see in Enoch being played out in the New Testament in that case. So we see this being played out where the sons of God mix with the daughters of men. Something happens that causes great wickedness. What's that thing? Well, it's actually in the book of Enoch. It's the Nephilim, and we're going to get back to what the New Testament authors believe about this. And I think the reason that I can talk about this in Enoch is because of what the New Testament says about it. So in Enoch, the Nephilim are born. They're giants, essentially. And the Hebrew word that we see more common is the Rephaim. And there was one famous Rephaim. His name was Anak. And so sometimes you see the giants referred to as the sons of Anak or the Anakites, because the Anakites were a race of giants named after their father Anak, one of the most famous Rephaim. So the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them, they were the mighty men of old, the men of renown.
Basically, this is an allusion, right? It's a literary allusion to another story that whoever is reading this would already know about. So, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
why it's so short and not all the details there, because they already know the story.
Right. There's a clear oral tradition that goes behind this. Now, I do want to be clear. I'm using Enoch that came long after Genesis in order to bring light to Genesis 6. The original readers of Genesis 6 did not have Enoch. What they had was an oral tradition that gave them the details that they were missing. This was a reminder of what they already knew, and that's actually a more common ancient way of writing, to remind you of the story you already know, not to because one thing I know about Hebrew is that it's not a language that's meant to be read.
Sorry, would you repeat that one more time about Enoch?
Yes, so I'm using Enoch to shed light on Genesis 6. The original audience of Genesis 6 didn't have Enoch. It wouldn't come about for over 1,000 years. The original audience of Genesis 6 had their oral tradition. That oral tradition presumably became the Book of Enoch. So I don't necessarily believe that Enoch is historical and factual in every way. What I do believe is that the people who were in the day that Enoch was written believed that it was historical and factual, and that they imputed it on Genesis 6. And because of what the New Testament authors will do with Enoch, I tend to believe that under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that it is mostly accurate on this accord. So, at least as far as the narrative and the story arc goes. So we'll keep going with the story, because the Nephilim become really important. So the Nephilim are on the earth, and in Enoch, the Nephilim they're hungry. They're very hungry, and they want they have an insatiable thirst for wine and for hard drink, and they have an insatiable hunger to the point that they can't feed him their Nephilim. They can't feed him enough cheese. And so they begin to try to appease the Nephilim in any way that they can, and they do so by feeding the Nephilim humans. This is where we get these abominations like the offerings to Molech in the Old Testament times, that they, whether they were instructed to by the sons of God or not, there was an instruction to feed these divine beings, or at least partially divine beings, half divine beings. Yeah, these, if I can call it this, the Nephilim are demigods. They're half divine, half human, at least as far as the story goes. And I think that's the word that we would more commonly use today. And so they began to sacrifice to them, to feed them. And this is where we get the abominable pagan sacrifices. So this is where we get all of the abominations and temple prostitution, presumably, or at least as far as Enoch and Jubilees and the books of Giants tell us. So continuing the narrative, God causes a worldwide flood because of the evil that's been perpetuated upon the earth. And it's not so much that humanity has become so evil that God can't fix humanity. It's that humanity has become so evil because the presence of rebellious divine beings upon the earth. It's the corruption upon the earth. And so God floods the earth. And what's interesting about that is he's successful in killing the Nephilim. I think the scriptures are fairly clear as we go forward in the book of, in the story of Noah. I think it's fairly clear. Now, I guess the one possibility is that it's not a worldwide flood, but I really think from the perspective of story and narrative, we're intended to read this as a worldwide flood. And so it's very interesting. We get to the end of it, and it's just Noah and his sons and their wives. And I really think that's the way, from a story perspective, we're intended to read it. And that may sound anti-intellectual. It may not line up with all of the facts that we know from geography and geology and all of that. And that's okay. There are definitely, I agree, questions to ask on that. But I'm here to talk about the story. And the story, as far as the Hebrew mind was, this was a worldwide flood. And the Nephilim were gone. And in Enoch, a problem arises because you can't kill a divine spirit or a divine soul. The divine souls have a different they have a different retribution than a human soul, and so you kill one of these things, and their spirit, the flesh goes into the ground, but the spirit is loosed. It's disembodied, and for this reason, when you go and look at the book of Joel, I'm sorry, not the book of Joel. There's some interesting things there on this topic as well. But when you go and look back at the book of Job, the giants show up again, and you might go, wait a minute, there's no giants in the book of Job. Well, actually, there are. It's interpreted shades in the book of Job. And so if you have your concordance or blue letter Bible or whatever software you want to use or whatever, go look this up. Look up the word Rephaim in the book of Job, and you'll find that it's interpreted shades. And I think that you would be right to interpret those shades with, like, the Lord of the Rings ring wraiths, right? Like, this is the kind of thing we're talking about, is spirits that have been disembodied, and they're bitter and angry, and they're on the earth. Now, they cannot get rest. Somebody, for my own benefit, tell me what the New Testament calls shades. Because they're there. Is everybody muted? You're not going to tell me? Come on. Noah left. Somebody's got to tell me. Don't be shy. I see you smiling.
You spell the word. Are you saying S-H-A-D-E-S?
Yes. Shades. What would the
are those the demons?
Yeah.
Referred to in the New Testament?
Yeah. Have you ever wondered where demons come from?
Anthony, what was the name again?
Shades. S-H-A-D-E-S.
That's kind of cool that shades mean demons. I mean, that's kind of just a great way to remember it.
Yeah, so shade doesn't actually mean demon, but they are the same character. The Rephaim, the shades of the Old Testament, are the demons of the New Testament. The daemon. Yeah, so Jamie wants me to talk about that. So let's talk about New Testament demons real quick. The word daemoni in the Greek has one common usage in Greek culture. It means God, but it means lesser God or lower God. So think Hermes, not Zeus. Well, yeah, it does. Yes, it does. So when you're in the book of 1 Corinthians, I know. But he's the messenger God. He's lesser. So when you're in the book of 1 Corinthians, and we have these warnings against idolatry in chapters 8 and 10. And I'm going to find the actual verse. Yeah, so here we go. So if we're in 1 Corinthians 10, 14, my beloved, flee from idolatry. What's idolatry? The worship of a God that's not God. I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? The bread that we break, is it not participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not these who eat the sacrifices participants at the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. So writing that to a church in Corinth with a pagan audience, You just heard they sacrificed to shades, to these evil spiritual beings on the earth. What the Greek audience read is you sacrifice to Athena, a lesser god.
Not Athena, that's not a good example.
Or whatever. They're all lesser gods. They're not.
The point is that God is God. God is higher than everything. And so like you're sacrificing to things, they don't matter. Like God is above all and more powerful than everything. All these things are a polemic against all the beliefs about these other gods that they think are powerful. And the whole point is that no, God is more powerful above everything.
Yeah. So this is the story there then. So in the story that we've been trying to piece together thus far, and we just can't get into every element of it. These demons in 1 Corinthians 10 are not the Rephaim, they're not the Nephilim, they're not the shades. These demons are the sons of God of the Old Testament. Okay? They are the divine beings that came down. No, they're not. They're the sons of God that came down. These are the lesser gods. And this is incidentally why the Old Testament repeatedly refers to the gods of the nations. And we just categorize that away and we go, oh, gods, that means the fake gods, the made up gods. But that is not the ancient worldview. The ancient worldview was there are really very real gods that rule over nations. And that's this whole issue with 1 Corinthians 10 and 1 Corinthians 8 and then Romans 12 also. Like, that's the whole issue, is that these people believed there were real gods. And even after coming to faith in Jesus, they were still going and sacrificing to gods that they believed were real, and yet pledging their allegiance to Jesus. And Paul was like, hang on a second, we've got a disconnect. If these gods were truly nothing, we'd have statements more like in chapter 8. We won't get too much into that. When you read the gospel accounts, though, you don't have lesser gods when a demon shows up. You have more like the shades. And this has confused a lot of biblical scholars over the centuries, because many scholars, all the way back to like 3rd, 4th, 5th century Christianity, have recognized that, wait a minute, the demons in Paul are not the same demons that are in the Gospels. What gives? You know, they knew it was the same word, but they didn't have the full picture. And the reason is that it's these demons' children that have been disembodied, and it's their spirits who roam upon the earth. It's those demons that are showing up in the Gospels. And I'll show you that. I know we're supposed to be, how do you spell Gennesaret? Oh yeah, here we go, I found it. So,
Anthony, question.
Yeah.
Would you say that these shades are the same thing that Paul talks about the principalities, powers of the air?
Sort of. So in Ephesians 6, when the Apostle Paul talks about the powers and principalities in the cosmos, he's actually talking about sons of God. Now remember, sons of God being divine beings. He's talking about sons of God that have been given power to rule. So think Daniel. In Daniel, you've got the archangel Michael. Is it Michael? Gabriel. Michael.
What are you talking about?
Daniel 7. I'm so bad with the names sometimes.
Michael.
It's Michael. So you've got the archangel Michael. And here we go. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay on his bed. This is long. It is. It gets down here. I saw night visions. All right. Daniel's vision of the ram and goat. Daniel's prayer for his people. Gabriel brings an answer because he's the messenger. Well, Gabriel's the messenger. Michael is the archangel. Maybe it was chapter 6.
I don't remember which chapter it's in.
See, this is why I would have liked to prepare. In in Daniel, you've got an exchange where the prince of where the hang on, that's how I'm going to find it. Prince.
There you go.
That's weird. Almost there.
Different.
Here we go. Daniel 11. Okay. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise. Oh, this is not it either. But I tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth, none will contend by my side except Michael, your prince.
Are you looking for the passage that talks about the prince of Persia?
Yeah, I think I just found it in 10.
Okay.
Is that it? Yeah, here we go. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was Belteshazzar. I'm pretty good with the names. That's a hard one. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict, and he understood what the word had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no. Okay, this is a long passage. And then I heard a sound of words, and behold, a hand touched me, and trembling on me. Okay. Behold, a hand touched me, verse 10, and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from that the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have become your words. And I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is happening to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. So just an observation about this prophecy. Daniel has prayed, and an angel has come to his aid with this message. And the message is, I'm sorry I'm late. So we've got a divine being, an angel, who's sorry he's late because the prince of Persia withstood him. So human princes don't withstand angels, right? So he's been in battle with a prince over Persia and was held up, and now has finally made it to deliver this message to Daniel. And it goes on that the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So now we have the protector, the archangel Michael, showing up. And he's come up to help to help so that he could get his message down to Daniel in Persia. And so this is sort of the picture of what we see all over the place in the extra biblical literature and the other sources, that these sons of God, these gods, have ruling authority over the nations. So it's this idea that we see commonly in the ancient world, that everything physical has a spiritual side, right? That there's spiritual underpinnings to all things in reality. And so if there's a king of a nation that's a human, there's a divine prince that is his power behind him. And that's sort of the idea that's playing out here in Daniel. And again, so this is the story, but we're going to have to ask the question of, is that a reality? But that's a question.
In some cases, would you say that could have been even in certain cultures, like their patron god, right? Like the prince of their prince, the principality of the prince, that the rulers are in themselves demigods. They're not really gods, but sometimes they're worshipped as gods, but they rule from divine presence. Extension.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we're going with it, Noah, that there's this belief that, and Mike Heiser calls it cosmic geography. So cosmic being that idea of the power in the cosmos, geography being that the cosmic powers are localized geographically. And so then we see Paul, let's go to Ephesians 6, where the question started. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against, notice that, we don't wrestle against physical things, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. Do you feel that we're living in darkness? Paul is very clear that there are cosmic powers that are ruling this present darkness against the spiritual forces of evil in the cosmos or in the heavenly places. And so this is one of those very clear passages where we see that this story of the giants and the gods and, you know, the sons of God from the Old Testament is believed in the days of Jesus and of the disciples. It's one of many of them. I think the question, I'm wondering if we want to stop there with that part of the story, because I think you had questions, Noah, about the nature of early humanity that you wanted answered in light of this reality. Is that right? Or
well, yeah, like yes, that is true, but also this is kind of the nature of what we do. Like every night's been completely unscripted with no notes, so like we just free flow on the thought. And so wherever you feel like it's a good place to pause to do questions would be great. We can do that for a little bit and meander into some of those early human, proto-human, demigod, mix of all things, mythology and history and religion, and they're all just, the people don't have categories like that, you know. That's always rich discussion, but we can always push that to next week too.
Well, let's
talk about what we've talked about.
Yeah, let's stick where we're at for the moment then, and just say in the context of anything we've talked about, try not to phrase your question "what about," if you would, for me. But well, no, I'm not afraid of what about questions. Go ahead and phrase your question any way you want. I just know there's so many more what about this questions than there is anything else. But let's go ahead and take some questions. I have the chat open also if you want to drop them there for those of you guys who are muted, whichever you guys want to do. I'd love to see where I might have rambled and lost anybody, or where you want maybe some more information.
Yeah, Anthony, I thought you were going to give some evidence or support of the demons having children in the New Testament, and I didn't quite get that.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm getting that right now. That was why I asked how you spell Gennesaret.
There's a rather overlooked verse in, I believe it's John, when John describes to his disciples that they are to be gods, like with a little g, as in sons of God, or demigod, or gods in the nature of, or after, in the power of, in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, so Noah, I'll quickly answer your question, then we'll get to the evidence that Josh asked for. That's the big aha of the New Testament that I meant to come back to. The big aha of the New Testament is that the sons of God failed. And they failed from jealousy, they failed from disobedience. And Jesus was perfectly obedient, as he was. This is going to sound weird, but you have to listen to it in the ancient worldview. Jesus, to the person standing in Jerusalem in the first century, Jesus was the demigod who didn't fail. And that's why Jesus is the morning star. Remember the morning stars? They sang as the creation came about. Well, who was the chief morning star who spoke all those things into being? That's Jesus, right? Colossians 1. John 1, right? And so you've got the chief morning star, who's the daimoni, the lesser god, At least in some sense, he believed himself to be lesser than the Father, although Paul says that although he counted himself less, he indeed wasn't any less. Philippians 2. And
Right.
so I certainly believe I'm Orthodox, but
and with Hebrews 1, how to which of the angels did he ever say, "You are my son"? It's like the superiority of Christ over the angels.
Yeah, and you see that ambiguity between the sons of God and the angels. Sort of, you've got seraphim and cherubim and watchers and various other classifications of angels that show up in other Hebrew literature, and then the New Testament is like, well, the angels.
Like a broad
it's
category.
like a broad category that we go, oh well, they're messengers, and it's like, well, yeah, that's one classification, like Gabriel, but not all of them were messengers. So anyway, so that being the idea is that through Jesus now we become the sons of God that the actual sons of God could have never been. That the original sons of God were judged. That's Psalm 82. Write that down for your notes. Psalm 82, and and then we become children of God. And it's sort of the there's really no better term, but like Mormons talk about this as divinization, the process of becoming divine. We say glorification, but glorification doesn't demand a new and divine essence. But isn't that what we get when we're filled with the Holy Spirit, is a new divine essence? And so, there is a becoming divine that happens when we come to faith in Jesus. There's at least an identification and a sort of a metaphysical change that takes place in us. The New Testament definitely teaches that, and that's what it means to become a child of God, is to have a nature that is no longer purely a human nature, but also a divine nature. All right, so check this out. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear, this is Luke 5, to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into the one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. Wait. This is not the story. I am off my game. I'm a morning person. How do I spell that?
That's right.
All right. Luke 8. All right.
You're doing good for this late at night. I'm proud of you.
Then they sailed to, I silly mistake, amateur mistake. I confused Gerasenes for Gennesaret.
Amateur.
You uncultured boob.
I know. Did you call me a boob?
How dare you? Every
right.
7-year-old I know could say the difference between Gennesaret and Gennesaret.
All right, so Luke 8:26. Then they sailed to the country of Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee, which is, by the way, a pagan island. When Jesus had stepped out to the land, there met him from the two cities. There met him a man from the city who had demons. Notice he has demons, not a demon. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in the house but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down at him and said in a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He had been kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven out by the demon into the desert. Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command him to depart into the abyss. That's fascinating. When Jesus casts out demons, they would go into the abyss. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, a large herd of pigs were feeding there in the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. All right, so you guys have heard that story, right? This is one of the weirdest stories, and yeah, it's super weird. Noah's like, yeah, whatever, yeah, which is actually appropriate. So why on earth first, did the demons think they were going into the abyss? And what does that mean? And 2, why would they instead want to go into the pigs if they were just going to drown in the lake anyway? And the answer to the latter is in the former. The abyss is a word that we see in a number of places in the New Testament. Yeah, it's actually, Jamie said Tartarus. It's the difference between.
Is that the Greek word here?
No, it's I don't believe so. It's
No.
it's abusos.
Okay.
That's cute. It's transliterated. Apparently, we get our word abyss from the Greek. So the word abyss is more like Tartarus if Sheol is more like Hades. And they often used the Greek terms for things, especially when they were talking to a Greek audience, because where Greek people had no real knowledge of Judaism, Jewish people were forced to have knowledge of Greek. And so the New Testament authors would frequently, and especially Luke being a Gentile, would frequently use the Roman or the Greek terms for things. And so, yeah, so it's this idea of the abyss, the eternal void. And this whole idea of the abyss in Jewish thought actually does come again from the Book of Enoch. So when Enoch goes to to go petition God on behalf of the sons of God who disobeyed and had and so on and so forth, because they're stuck on earth, right? And remember, we've talked about you've talked about fallen angels, right? The devil's fall and the fall of the angels and so on and so forth. They were cast out. They were, or at least they left on their own and refused to come back in the Book of Enoch. And so Enoch goes to petition on their behalf, but he doesn't just like boom enter into the throne room of God. So he gets over here to the spiritual realm, and he's cruising around this place checking stuff out, and he's got a spirit guide, an angel who's guiding him around, and he gets to this one corner, and he's like, "What is this? There's nothing here but nothing." And that's basically how it reads in Enoch, in the Greek. There's nothing here but nothing. And he says, that's the place that's been prepared for, that's the place that's been prepared for the sons of God, I believe is what he says. Yeah. I forget how it reads exactly, but it's really interesting because it's the place, it's nothing prepared for nothing is essentially what it is. And that's the abyss. It's the pit that shows up in the book of Revelation. It's the abyss that in the book of Jude that the disobedient angels are chained under, and so on and so forth. So that's the abyss. And the thinking here is that when sorry, baby, I'm apparently being like echoing through my entire house. My the whole thinking here is that if that's what's going to happen when Jesus casts them out, then they don't want to go there, so they want to go instead into the pigs. All right, so let's ask this question that I already explained, but I'm not sure in its fullest. What happens? Yeah, totally, Charity. So what happens to the what happens here to the spirit of a demigod when the flesh dies? The spirit is loosed. The spirit doesn't die. So they've found a nice home in this guy that they've been tormenting, and now Jesus is ready to free him, but they beg him not to send him to the abyss, but instead to send him into the pigs, because the pig flesh can die. That's whatever. They don't care about that. The pig flesh can die, but the spirits then remain upon the earth is the presumption. So this is what we call, to Josh's question, he asked for the evidence in the New Testament. And what we don't have is evidence in the way we talk about evidence. We don't have evidence that says, and the shades that are the spirits of the deceased Nephilim were then loosed again upon the earth when the pigs drowned in the lake. That's what we don't have. That would be evidence in the way that we think about evidence. But what we do have is negative evidence. What we have is, it's not called negative evidence. That's something else. What we have is called, man, I don't teach logic and stuff like that. I've studied it, but then I don't remember all the words. What we have here is a process of deriving meaning that allows us to go, what did Luke know? And further understanding our orthodoxy, what was the Spirit inspiring in Luke to record about this situation? And this seems to me to be an obvious, that Luke had an obvious understanding of what was taught about the demons in the Book of Enoch. Does that make sense?
I still don't get how we derived that these are the sons of the Nephilim, their spirit when they die, and this is spirit sons. I don't get that connection.
Oh, as opposed to what, like just fallen angels?
Or yeah, I don't get how we get that it's offspring instead of just demons themselves. Are that's the part where I'm kind of like, how do we get to that?
Well, we get it because the New Testament doesn't explain where they come from at all. But this story, especially, probably more clearly than any, hints that Luke believed what was taught about them from Enoch. And Enoch clearly lays it out. And so I guess I can't be super dogmatic about it.
Because the point being, Luke had read the Book of Enoch and was familiar with it. Maybe more so than some of the other biblical books that are included in our canon, even because it was more recent. So, like, yeah, Shakespeare's more important than the Da Vinci Code.
Right.
But there's a lot more people that have read the Da Vinci Code right now than Shakespeare, probably, just in America, because it's a lot easier to read, and it was very popular and much more accessible. So, like, if you think about that just in biblical literature, something that from the Second Temple period just made, it was just easier to read. It was like watching a color film instead of a black and white. So.
Yep. So, I would almost actually say potentially something the opposite there. I'm not sure that Luke, as a Gentile, had read Enoch. But he had definitely read the Greek religious literature. And remember what we said, like, these patterns show up in all of it.
Anthony, what because the Septuagint had the Apocrypha in it. So it wasn't just the pure Old Testament scriptures that we look at. Would the Book of Enoch have been in that?
So yes and no. So it depends on who you talk to. So the Septuagint isn't a singular work. Like I have a resource in my Bible software that lets me look at all of the known manuscripts for every single passage in the Septuagint, because it's not a single work, like 70 guys sat down and broke it up into 70 chunks and translated their parts.
Right.
What the Septuagint really is a collection of all of the Greek literature that's been, when you go pick up a copy of the English Septuagint, you're getting like a synthesis of all of the Greek literature. But there's wide disagreement about even among the Greeks as to what exactly they say. So for that reason, we get different collections of the Septuagint, exactly what's in there and what isn't.
No, I mean, I wouldn't think that, like, I'm not proposing that Luke would know the Book of Enoch better than, like, the Old Testament or anything like that. I wouldn't say that, but I just thought that might have been part of it.
Yeah, no, I mean,
well,
I think it could be.
Isn't the Book of Enoch written in Greek?
So that's an interesting.
I thought it was originally in Greek.
Presumably, it was originally in Greek. Our oldest complete copies of Enoch are actually in Ethiopic.
Right, there we go.
And most of our
It is in the Ethiopic Bible.
and it is in the Ethiopic Bible, and it is in some collections of the Septuagint, but only ones that have later replications. And in other words, long after the Ethiopic language came about, and so we're not really sure if it was backwards translated to Greek because the Coptics have way more in their Bible than even the apocryphal books, and so it's tough to tell if originally Enoch was included in the Greek literature or not. We do have fragments of Enoch. We do have tons of fragments of Enoch that we know were generated all the way back in, before Jesus.
If anybody wants more information about those,
Would you say that Enoch is representative of a common Second Temple Hellenistic Jewish worldview?
Yes. In fact, I would say it frames it so much that it's not even funny. So Josh shared this a minute ago. He shared Jude 1:6, I think. Jude, where it says
it references it.
Yes.
Yeah, and the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling, he is kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Yeah, that's
interesting to me because of the different Greek words used to describe what we translate hell. My picture of the abyss though was a bottomless pit as opposed to like something like the lake of fire or something like that. It wasn't something with like chains. So that I haven't really thoroughly looked into it though.
Yeah. Well, what's very interesting about it, Josh, is to look in Revelation where the pit is opened again, and to see what Jesus does with the pit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I mean, that's getting probably more off topic because I just saw another question here from Jared, but definitely interesting on that point. So I think to synthesize my answer, Josh, I do not think that we have to believe that like beyond a shadow of a doubt that the demons are the spirits, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. But I do think it's fairly obvious that the New Testament authors believed that, and it fits the narrative better than fallen angels, because we do see that the fallen angels are actually the gods of the nations, not disembodied spirits like the demons we see in the New Testament. So I think it all fits. I think it fits the narrative better. But we do need to be careful of just trying to put a puzzle in a piece and saying that it must be true because the piece fits.
No, and I get that. And I know we need to move on, but I think that you can you can't have different, just to limit demons to just one thing as like something that would be over a country or a city or province is limiting when it seems like there's different roles even of angels, seraphim, cherubim, and so on. So I think that there could have likewise been different roles with demons.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So I do think that the demons that, Paul tends to talk about demons more in the sense of the ones that had authority over nations and so on and so forth, cosmic powers, etc. The gospel authors tend to talk more about the shades. I do think they are very closely related, and I do think that they're all working towards the same ends. And there's, I suppose more to explore there. But I would totally agree with you that in differentiating between the fallen angels and the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, I'm definitely not putting them in two separate classes. They're all part of the same team. The bad guys. So, all right. So Jared said, I'd like to hear more about the shades within the book of Job that was mentioned, any references and or resources to look into. Let's do that one here. So
There we go.
Come on. All right, so I'm gonna find the references for you real quick.
Yay, logos.
Oh, whoops. And all passages. Oh, it's lying to me. That's annoying. Okay.
So
I'm gonna get it, I promise.
okay, while you're doing that, let me just say in like a kind of synopsis sort of way, because I like how you say they're all on the same team. I think one of the challenges we face as modern readers of the Bible, anybody, is having a cohesive approach to the scripture, both in how we read it, but also in like it cohesively making sense with like internal logic. So you don't go like, well, I'm over here, and now I've got to pull out this entirely different explanation to explain the next chapter. And this totally unrelated part to go, it's like, no, we want to develop the most cohesive and comprehensive understanding of the narrative of Scripture from all that we can understand. And we are able to enter into the worldview of an ancient person more than any other culture has been able to because of our resources, and across a really broad spectrum of things. And we can bring in things like the Book of Enoch and go, all right, we don't have to read this like it's the Bible, but we can read it to tell us what people that were reading the Bible early on, or maybe writing the Bible, or even Jesus himself was aware of, would have been like thinking about the world in these terms. So it's not necessarily meaning that those are the scientific terms that we need to lock into and go, okay, that accurately describes the entire reality of what's happening there. It's like, that's how those people thought about the world, but it's also how they described a whole heck of a lot of things. So if you're thinking of like a demon as a demigod, and then being real physical spiritual beings, it's not a stretch then to think of the powers and principalities, like the big networks of powers, as being extensions of spiritual realities, right? Like, so that certain whole, and like if we think of the seven sins, right? Like the kind of the way that's been theatricized, I didn't say that correctly, but over time, just think of that like, okay, across kingdoms or nations or tribes or people groups or races or classes or whatever. I think that's how we think of principalities, kind of in line with that, where it could be something you think of comprehensively. And that Jesus being the kind of ruler of all things, being the manifest extension of like all-powerful, perfect God, crushes those things. But then just kind of like that manifest God doesn't go and say, all right, I'm going to just do the whole thing and wipe your ass the whole way for you. Pick it up now. And like calls us to live like that's real.
Yeah.
Right, like that, and that's the challenge. And this is the hardest thing for Americans to understand. That is the exact definition of faith. That's what Abraham is accredited with, right? It's not by living legalistically or believing the right precise thing about any one particular thing, except believing God's character, that God is who he says he is when he revealed himself to Abraham.
Yeah, we get
believe that. Okay, then if we believe that and live that way, well, that's what faith is. That's what credited to us as faith. Just because it is, that's what it is. We believe that then.
Yeah, the word pragmatism has gotten a lot of flack in contemporary Christianity, but Christianity, properly speaking, is Christians are called to have so much faith that we have no excuse not to live pragmatically.
Yeah.
Right? We believe so deeply, the conviction is so strong that we live that we have no choice but to be pragmatic and to actually do what our faith demands.
Yeah. And it's
and that's the point of these stories, is to incite in us, it's not to incite us to believe mythological things and to argue about whether or not they're real or they're historical or they're not historical. It's to implant deep spiritual realities, deep truths that, like Jamie just said, it's to implant spiritual realities into us in such a way that we live as though there really is a cosmic war and a battle over the hearts of men.
Right. Like regardless of however we want to classify it by modern, postmodern, scientific, atomic terms, Jesus, Luke, his disciples, the people in the early church, the Apostle Paul, they all believed the world operated this way. And it doesn't really matter how detailed their description of that was. We believe they're true, not because of legalism or technicalities or even like precision in our dating systems or anything like that. But we believe the character of Jesus, just like Abraham believed the character of God. We believe the mark of the disciples is evident in like that the church has survived, like regardless of all odds that it ever should have. Kind of the way Israel survived against completely all odds against what they should have. It's like these are kind of marks, and we identify those. So if we believe Jesus is true, what he's describing in first century ancient Near Eastern Hellenistic terms is that our physical realities are completely connected with our spiritual realities.
Yes.
And when he quotes the Psalms to his prophets, when he talks, or to his disciples, when he talks about being reborn, all of these things are kind of in line with not changing something in its kind of necessarily DNA. It's more in our, so what we would understand is like all of our thinking, our neural pathways, the like patterns we have, the rigid ways that we can't unlock certain realities. Think about the Matrix, right? Like the most that people could do with these like little bends until like Neo, the prophet, comes along. I know, I totally mentioned the Matrix. It's so like hippie post.
So 10 years ago anyway.
I know, but like it is the model of like thinking about alternate reality. It's very, very hard for us to do. So like faith is an exercise in doing that, and you kind of have to do it in little like adjustments most of the time. I mean, you make leaps in it, but it's continual like revelation of like, oh God, like we have always been spiritual creatures, that the earth is of like a substance that is God, like whatever carbon is, whatever the universe is made out of, this exists within God. This is not this is not Platoism, right? This isn't dualism. This isn't like spirit's good and my body's bad, and we need to usher in the apocalypse so I can escape the earth. This is, I need to live into the earth aware that all those spiritual things are going on. I just probably don't have as big of a perspective on things as I think I do, which is, that's true of everything, isn't it? Like not just the spiritual world, but like all things.
Yeah, we never know as much as we think we do. Hey, let's go talk about the shades, and then I want to comment on Lynn's comment, and then I'm gonna start looking at the clock here. So yeah, I think it's okay. It's pretty early still. We're only doing a 14-mile bike ride tomorrow.
Fine.
It's not that long. It's only 14. So, all right. So I want to look at a number of passages. The first one is Job 26:5. And I love the CSB, the way that the Christian Standard Bible renders this. If you look at the ESV, it says, the dead tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. But the CSB translates this, the departed spirits tremble beneath the waters and all that inhabits them. And what is that? What sort of image does that incite in you? Oh, well, Jude 1:6, the angels who did not keep their position but abandoned their proper dwelling, he kept in eternal chains in deep darkness under judgment for the great day. It's an under the darkness. It's an under the water. It's the gloom. It's the gloomy darkness. It's a lot of the same imagery showing up there. So that's in Job, and that word translated departed spirits is the word Rephaim, that most places in the Old Testament is translated giant. And everywhere in Greek literature, virtually, it's translated giant. But it doesn't make sense to say the giants tremble beneath the waters. That doesn't make any sense, right? So they've gone, the tradition of translation of this is to speak of the dead giants, the dead Rephaim. And so that's what we see in all of our modern translations. And we miss that just because we don't, we're not looking at Greek and Hebrew because, we don't know it. And but that's why I really appreciate what the CSB did with it and calling the Rephaim the departed spirits. So that's one. The next one, Isaiah 26:14. The dead do not live. The departed spirits do not rise up. And indeed, you have punished and destroyed them. You have wiped out all memory of them. Mm-hmm. And there's a prophecy of Isaiah about what's going to become the departed spirits of the Rephaim. So again, the CSB chose to translate that departed spirits. And if you look at the ESV, what we often consider one of the most conservative translations, it uses the word dead again. It just says the dead do not rise up. And it's like, yeah, duh, we know that, but they're losing something in the translation because Rephaim is not talking about dead humans. It's talking about dead giants. And
I didn't know that, man. That's really good.
Yeah, so then Psalm 88:10. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do departed spirits rise up to praise you? Again, we've got the psalmist. It's actually really neat in context. You have distanced my friends from me. You have made me repulsive to them. I am shut up and cannot go out. My eyes are worn out from crying. Lord, I cry out to you all day long. I spread out my hands to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do departed spirits rise up to praise you? He's like, I am here praising you, and you are not hearing me. What are the demons going to praise you? That's literally, he's using, David here is using this word Rephaim like very figuratively, and how he's using it. And that tells us that there was a cultural understanding of what is meant by it, that he would use it euphemistically, or no, not the word, that he would use it colloquially as common language. Just, oh yeah, what are the Rephaim gonna praise you? Like, because he would use it that way, it demonstrates that it's a common way of thinking about the giants, among that culture. And that would actually feed then into Josh's question about, where do we actually see this in the Bible? That this is another place where we, to be ironic, see a shadow of that way of thinking in the scriptures. Yeah, definitely it is. Let's look at another one, Isaiah 14:9. Sheol below is eager to greet your coming, stirring up the spirits of the departed for you. All the rulers of the earth, making the kings of nations rise from their thrones. And then, so that's another place that Rephaim, giants, is translated as shades. And then Isaiah 26:19, Your dead will live, their bodies will rise. Awake and sing, you who dwell in the dust, for you will be covered with morning dew, and the earth will bring out the departed spirits. So this is kind of interesting because this one actually reflects the book of Revelation, where he's saying, look, eventually the earth is going to give up the dead and bring about the return of the departed spirits. And I mean, it all depends on how you're going to put together the end times, but I think everybody puts the return of departed spirits, you know, one final battle, if you want to look at it that way, or whatever, or some you know, more preteristic thinkers just putting the just the idea that the pit is going to be opened, so that, you know, everything, you know, hell and death and Hades can be cast in. Whichever way you're going to look at it, or any other way, there is a sort of a tie to Revelation here, that it's going to be opened up and the departed spirits are coming out. And that's the Rephaim, the demons who have been chained in glooming darkness.
Now, in some cases, isn't shades also just dead people?
Yeah, so Jamie asked the question, doesn't Rephaim, translated shades, or in the CSB departed spirits, doesn't that sometimes just mean dead people? And I would say the only place that it sounds like it could mean dead people was Isaiah 14:9, the one we just read, where it said, Sheol below is eager to greet your coming, stirring up the spirits of the departed for you, all of the rulers of the earth, making the kings of the nations rise from their throne. And the only reason I say that is because it sounds like in Sheol that Sheol is a place that humans are going to go, right? Sheol meaning grave. And so that makes sense. And that the spirits of the departed are already there in Sheol and being stirred up for, and are being stirred up to greet the coming of the one who's dying, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so that's not what happened. That doesn't fully accord with everything else that we've talked about regarding the spirits of the departed spirits. And because of that, you could kind of say, well, maybe Isaiah really meant departed spirits of humans, not departed spirits of angels, for instance, or demigods, Nephilim.
Yeah, but why would the kings of the past rise up for just the regular human?
Well, yeah, that, right? And also we have thousands of years of history from people who were far more comfortable thinking about spiritual realities than most Westerners are. And this is where we get this idea of the demons tormenting people in hell. I mean, this is literally the verse that we get that from. And then, you know, so why do we, you know, why deny it? So, yeah. John, what did you say there? Psalm 88:10, Hebrew Rephaim, sometimes translated shades, the weakened state of those who have died. Huh, where did you get that from? I'm wondering what's meant by that, the weakened state of those who have died.
I know in a lot of cultures.
Oh, from the Lexham English Bible. Yeah. Huh.
I know in many cultures, there's reverence around the dead for, like, you know, a various period of days, not out of ritual mourning, but out of like, parking lot, out of like, out of belief that people do not die instantly when they die.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It sounds like it sounds like, and definitely it's afterlife. Whatever it is.
I think, there's like, this day I'll see you in paradise. There's the absent with the body, present with the Lord. There's Saul's death and so on. There's examples of people dying and going somewhere right away as well.
Yeah, I think we actually get a lot of that thinking more from Old Testament thinking, because there's definitely, as you read the Old Testament, an uncertainty about what happens after death. But even David says, and I forget what psalm it is. Somebody could look it up for me if they wanted to. But David says, and yet even you will not abandon my soul unto Hades, and so, or unto Sheol. And he's saying, look, even though I go to the grave, I know that you will not leave me there. And so there was, the Ecclesiastes, you have set eternity in our hearts. And
David could have been, though, that could be hyperbolic language about, like, I'm going to the brink of death and you'll save me.
Yeah, certainly it could be figurative language, and it's, it's almost my pattern to read it that way. But I do still think Ecclesiastes, you have set eternity in my hearts there, as we read a number of passages that definitely are talking about the grave and the abyss. It seems like it just seems to me that it's pretty clear that the ancient world believed that something like they would die, but so in other words, the soul departs, but that the soul then would be one day delivered to its final resting place. And so I think maybe that's where some of that journey comes into play. But then as we get into the New Testament, you follow this forward. Jesus rises from the grave, and at the end of Luke, Luke's got a unique account of what happened when Jesus rose from the grave. Let's see if I can find it. That's the road to Emmaus.
That's where other people rise from the grave, right?
Yeah. Well, who rose? Who does it say rose?
I was going to say, like, even if it's taken figuratively in the grave, or it just means death, or even, like sometimes they wrote and they didn't even know what they were writing. Like there's more to it, and we know this because it's interpreted in the New Testament, like in Acts 2:27, when it says, "You won't abandon your Holy One to hell, Sheol." And it's actually quoting something that, even if David didn't mean it that way, it was certainly used that way in the New Testament.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, and I'm one who definitely believes that, Jesus as the incarnate Word is the interpretive key to the entire Scriptures, and so I'm far more comfortable reading the Old Testament through the lens of the New Testament rather than letting the Old Testament stand alone. That to me, sometimes that's called a redemptive historical reading of the Scripture. But that seems to me to be not necessarily the most logical, but certainly the most theologically cohesive way to read the Scriptures. And so, yeah, you're definitely going to read it and say, man, whatever God inspired in David, it became perfect in the words of Jesus. Absolutely. Yeah, I was trying to find it. Yeah, so when another woman with these words seemed like nonsense, Peter, however, got up and it's not Luke, maybe it's John. Anyway, one of the gospel accounts has the saints rising again, and they've risen out of Sheol, or out of Abraham's bosom.
Is this at the death of Jesus?
Yeah, at the resurrection. But I can't find it.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. It's John 10:34 through 36.
Oh my gosh, I was almost there. I was on John 10:23 skimming. So it was
Bible drill. Boom.
Oh, we're gonna do this one. This one's gotta.
Boom.
Oh, this is wait, John 10:34 through 36.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about this one?
Wait, is that the one you were thinking of? Oh, no. Sorry,
we can
this
talk
is a
about that
different
one all night.
Sorry, no, that was the one I was looking at earlier. The other one I think is in John, or I can't remember where it is now. Where the dead rise. Which one is it? I don't know.
Matthew 27:52.
You're welcome.
Oh, you just put it down there. Thank you. I didn't see that. Thank you. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after the resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. Yeah, so you see that idea that they were in a resting place in Sheol. They rose. They're no longer on the earth, by the way. I don't know if anybody noticed that. The Walking Dead. I don't. I would wager to say the most logical way to read this verse is that in the book of Acts, when Jesus ascended, so did the saints, since that's what they're supposed to do theologically. As Jesus rose, we rise. As Jesus ascended, we ascend and are seated at the right hand with Christ. So. All right. Any other questions you guys want to throw out there?
Anthony, this was super good, man. I really appreciate your well-versedness in this, especially in stuff like the Book of Enoch. That's not a we're not all very familiar with that one, myself included. I know some of the stuff that's in it, but it's been a very long time since I read any of it.
It's an incredible read just to read First Enoch. Don't read Second and Third Enoch; they're garbage. But I mean, they don't have a lot to contribute theologically. But
they're probably not written by the same person either.
Yeah, I want to give you guys a couple of things that are interesting to read. I would say that Supernatural by Michael Heiser is a really good starting point for you guys. It's easy. If you want something meatier that has footnotes and leads you to a lot of the research, especially as we talk about the other sources or the extra biblical sources, read The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. And I'll send... Here, Jamie, actually, will you type in there? Jamie's going to put it in the chat, the names of the books. So Supernatural by Heiser, Unseen Realm by Heiser. And then if you get interested in the Book of Enoch, Mike also has, he just released a companion to the Book of Enoch. It's like a micro commentary. So or like Bible study notes on the Book of Enoch that help you see some of the biblical allusions that are happening there. And then Powers and Principalities and Paul's Letters by Ed. It's not Cohen. I'm going to have to look it up real quick. I've got it open right here, but Jamie's typing these for you. Is going to answer a lot of your questions about the New Testament. And we'll drop it in there in a second, but I wanted to say a word of this. This book has a whole part on the biggest question that I've had regarding this entire topic of sort of the unseen realm and all of that. And so it's easy for me to believe that ancient people believed in this mythology, if you will. Okay. Now, and I'm comfortable calling it mythology because properly speaking, when we tell the story through the narrative, we're talking mythologically. Now, C.S. Lewis called it the myth that is true. So mythology doesn't mean that it's not truth, but it is properly speaking the way to talk about these supernatural things in the scriptures. So the problem is the way that we read mythology is not usually historically. And so I do have a question about the historicity of it, because I do see many places that you can I do see many places that in the story that you can believe that the ancient people believed it and still walk away with the same spiritual realities without believing the narrative yourself. Now I lean towards the full narrative is true. But I'm very comfortable in questioning what it is that I think and believe. And so, yeah, click on it there and then get the author. Click there on the book.
I'm trying to. It's not letting me try.
Oh, my computer's freezing. It doesn't like running Zoom and my Bible software at the same time sometimes. So
Yeah.
I'm really comfortable with it. Like admitting that, that I doubt Clinton Arnold is the author. It doesn't highlight. And I would definitely say that if you have questions about whether or not this narrative is true, or if you want to see more of Paul's dealing with the issues of the occult and the spirit world, this book is really amazing. It's very scholarly and yet accessible at the same time. Like, it's well researched. That's also how Unseen Realm is. It's well researched, but it's and that's what I mean by scholarly, but it's very accessible. Anybody can read it. So highly recommend Unseen Realm and Powers of Darkness.
Supernatural is great. I'm about halfway through that one. It's great so far.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed it. I posted a quote in the Brewing Dialogues group by a German captain in the Nazi. He was a German playwright that was exiled during Nazi Germany, and it talks about don't rejoice in the killing of the beast, the bitch breeds again, or something like that. I mean, it's a German translation, or it's translated from German, but he's referring to Hitler, and even referring to you can kill Hitler, you're not going to kill Nazism.
How are you?
Wait, what? Hello? Oh.
wasn't me.
So I posted it in there. We don't have to go here at all tonight because it's 10:30, so we're good. But maybe next week or something to munch on is the idea that and we've already entered into these waters, we'll probably just step a little bit further into the tides of epistemology. I think we have to, as we're talking deeper about narrative and truth, because truth for us we've got many different categories of truth, and we expect a lot of them to be hit right on the mark. Ancient people didn't have as many categories, right? They didn't think it scientifically, and so for us, those categories are really unhelpful sometimes. So we think of there's history, but then at some point there's anthropology, and then before anthropology there was evolutionary biology, but before that there's geology or astronomy. Okay, if you're going in this timeline, right? But if we stop thinking in all these academic categories we have, you just go, well, that's the past, and we are a part of that, and that's whatever happened. We think we think we can figure out exactly what happened, but it's that was supernatural. We are an extension. All of creation is an extension of that. We're unique among creation. We are an extension of that, made in God's image. Oh, that's an extension. We are image bearers, icons, ergo, that. So when a demigod that's a power, right, that is part of this, if we think about that being embodied, and that dies, like you said, that spirit leaves and moves about the earth or goes under the waters, which is that reference goes all the way back to Genesis 1, right? Where it's waters and chaos and evil, right? It's like, that's what's like keeping the world in this like chaotic, horrible state. And then God comes and separates it. That the waters and the kind of demonic and the spiritual are connected because of the chaos, but that the spirit roams. Well, it reemerges, right? And so we see that in like leaders, right? We see that in archetypes of people throughout history. We even see that on a powers and principalities level of nations and empires, people groups, right? The freaking people that have lived around like Poland and Germany and France and like the Ukraine, they've killed each other for thousands of years. And they've all had kind of different names in different countries and rulers and ideologies at all the different times, but this thing keeps emerging over and over again. It's like, well, there's something bigger that's driving that than one human, or even just a whole bunch of individual collective actions of humans, that the sum equals more than the total of its parts, that there's something exponential happening. And that can be like there are evil powers at work that are invisible, but it can also mean that in an equal way, when image bearers of God work together, when people are the body, the ligaments, the parts of Christ, the embodiment of Christ, that there's exponentially more happening than the sum of its parts, that it's there's something more going on than just human activity.
There is something more.
The sword cuts both ways, though, right?
It does.
Everything's spiritual.
Right, because and there's so many layers to it, because on the most service level of meaning, you've got, just to use your example, you've got nations that have undergone changes in names and ideologies, but the same nations fighting with each other, fighting the same war over and over and over the same land. And it's and you're, on one hand, we look back and we go, see what the Bible teaches. It teaches that there's powers that are at war in the cosmos, fighting for victory in reality, right? And so everything undergirded by the Spirit. But at the same time, we're also called to read the scriptures in such a way that we go, man, I can't believe we're at war again. And to go, right, but God wins, right? Or just to put it more practical, like we shouldn't read about pestilence, right? So we're reading prophecies of the end times, and it promises pestilence is going to come in the end as one of many signs or one of many circumstances. And you read that and you go, we're not, I don't believe we're meant to read that so that every time there's pestilence in the world, we go, oh, the end is nigh, right? I don't think we're meant to read it that way. We're meant to read it as there's pestilence, Jesus wins, right? Because we're meant to read the story. And so that every time there's hardship in life, there's wars and rumors of wars, there's death and dying, there's fighting, there's disease, there's earthquakes, there's the stars are falling from the heavens, there's meteor showers or whatever, and we see these types of things happening, hurricanes and tornadoes and blah 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 blah, and we go, yeah, that's right, and I know the story, and Jesus wins. Right. And so it points us forward to the spiritual reality, and it also points us backwards to the spiritual underpinnings.
I think it also points us to that those things, and COVID would be probably a good real life example of this, shake us to make us realize that there's more to reality than what we experience, that we're not as in control of the universe as we think we are, that our categorizations of things don't mean jack shit when there's a virus that comes out. We can call it whatever we want. People are just starting to die. So like those things shake us and are meant to in a way that I think calls us to, if we step into that reality and say, okay, I believe that, and I also believe that I'm an image bearer made in God's image, and I'm like Christ's a co-heir with Christ, right? Like that's what that would be. He's a king ruling in his kingdom, and then he says his 12 will rule, along with him over angels. I mean, there's some strange stuff in there where you're like, wait, what? How does that work out now? Right? But
Yeah, like when Paul says that we're going to sit on Jesus' throne with him.
Yeah, right. But like,
it's
if we think about what that, if we, and this is where I'm like, dude, I read the Bible way more literal in a lot of places than literalists read the Bible, because I'm like, yeah, okay, so if we do that and we're like the heroes of old, the Nephilim, right? Like, which the Hebrew for that means fallen ones, right? Is that the Hebrew for that? Or that? No, that's the Greek translation. No, the Greek translates it giants.
Giants. Rephaim.
But the Hebrew is fallen ones, but it doesn't have a negative category early on. It's like they're the heroes of old, right? The mythic men, the men of renown, right?
So that's the Gibborim. He says it's the Nephilim, which is a term that we cannot clearly define.
Right. And
Nephilim can't be clearly defined, but he says that they are also the Rephaim, or the Gibborim, which is the men of renown.
Yeah.
Which means mighty. It means the mighty warriors.
Yeah, it's and it's like the mythic heroes, the heroes of the cultural mythic icon heroes in some way, right? There's like archetypes.
Yeah.
And so, no, I can't remember. I was tying that back to what I was originally talking about. It's kind of a long thought. Oh, well.
That's okay. No, I got to tune out. I dropped my email in there. If anybody has questions, I'll happily, earlier in the day when I can think more clearly, I can send you guys snippets of books.
No, this is great.
Happy to answer any questions that come up in the middle of the night or whatever when you're lying awake.
I put all of our, like I said, everything's in this Facebook group, and I think I sent all of you guys a link. Some of you are already in there, but feel free to post away in there and check out some of these resources. I'm gonna even some of the book links and stuff. So this is great, man. Thank you, Anthony.
Absolutely. All right, guys. I'm going to sign off. We'll catch you later. Thank you, Noah. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, that was great. Stop the recording.
Hey, you guys too, Anthony, Jamie. Good to see you guys again.